Alarm bell rings, same thing every day. They'll answer the phone, I'm not home, I'm already on my way. Out the door, down the street, got to keep me on my feet. I got coffee, I got donuts, in the office down the street. And the fat hat lady's faking a heart attack. And my manager yelling at me, say, can't give her money back. The bank called, the note is overdue. And that's just one more thing I gotta do. Till I get on to you. Till I get on to you. 12 o'clock, the lunch bell rings. Same thing every day. You better answer the phone in the proper tone. Yes, sir, whatever you say. Right on time, on the time. Got to keep me on my feet. I got contracts, I got lawyers. In the office, down the street. Bank jam is backing up. More than I can stand. Things ain't working out the way I had them planned. Ain't on the meeting, just a drink or two. That's just one more thing I gotta do. Till I get on to you. Till I get on to you. Till I get on to you. Till I get on to you.
Welcome, everyone. We're happy that you've joined us today for this installment of the virtual Rising Voices 8 meeting. I'm Heather Lazarus from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, and together with Julie Maldonado from the Livelihoods Knowledge Exchange Network, and with support from the Olohana Foundation and Lomikai Media, we've been taking Rising Voices online for a series of interactions this summer. So welcome again at this point. A little background for anybody who is new. The Rising Voices Center for Indigenous and Earth Sciences facilitates intercultural, relational-based approaches for understanding and adapting to extreme weather and climate events, climate variability, and climate change. The program brings Indigenous and other scientific professionals, tribal and community leaders, environmental and communication experts, students, educators, and artists across the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii, and the Pacific Ocean and Caribbean islands, and around the world, to assess critical community needs and pursue joint research, really aimed at developing optimal plans for community action towards sustainability. Rising Voices acknowledges the inherent value of Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous science, adaptive practices and processes, and honors those equally with earth sciences. Really at its core, Rising Voices aims to advance science through collaborations that bring Indigenous and earth sciences, including atmospheric, social, biological, and ecological disciplines, into partnership. It supports adaptive and resilient communities through sharing scientific capacity and provides opportunities for Indigenous students and early career scientists through scientific and community mentoring. Further, it helps Western-trained scientists expand their observational skills, research paradigms, and capacity to apply and translate findings and ultimately their science. This month, we have the next installment of Virtual Rising Voices 8 with the panel session on energy systems, building off of May's phenology discussion and June's really great community relocation and site expansion discussions. We'll continue to think about the nexus that really connects all of these topics together that we talk about in breakout groups when we have our in-person meetings as well. And that really form the Rising Voices working groups that are emerging through this process. In particular, in the session today, we'll build towards energy systems and working group session on Friday, July 24th. Please join us then. And now it is a great honor to hand this over to Dr. Dan Wildcat, who has generously taken on the role of moderator today. Thank you, Dan.
Delasan, Zoyaha, Yushiha, Muskogee. Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Wildcat. I am a child of the sun, Yuchi member, enrolled member of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma. And I'm talking to you all from the south side of the south banks of the Kansas River here in Lawrence, Kansas. And just an honor to be hosting such a distinguished panel of speakers on such an important topic. So to kind of frame what we're going to do today, we've got 6 speakers. They could all do easily an hour on this topic, but they won't. We're going to try to keep this short and sweet and very much to the point. And we're going to try to raise those really important questions and issues early in our comments. And talking about energy, we're looking particularly at this interface between policy, science, and practice. We really want to focus on the issue of energy equity and justice in the systems that we think must be developed in our native nations in this larger landscape of the United States of America and really across this Mother Earth. Pretty huge challenges, but we're going to frame this around that intersection, policy, science, and practice. We're going to frame it around equity and justice and really try to tie together some of these complicated relationships between education, economics, policy, science, community, revitalization or rejuvenation. So I'm going to do a very quick introduction of our speakers, and then we'll get started here. So the first person I want to introduce is Faith Spotted Eagle. She is a enrolled Yankton Sioux Nation tribal member. All of you know, most of you I'm sure know Faith for her incredible work. She is an elder, a wisdom keeper, very active at Standing Rock, and she's currently been working with the tribes along the Missouri River on how to do really not just an ecological restoration, but a cultural restoration. So we're glad to have Faith Spotted Eagle with us here. Another person who doesn't need any introduction is Mervyn Tano, Native Hawaiian, the Chief Executive Officer, President, whatever, of the International Institute for Indigenous Resource Management. And Merv may have the best creds of anyone here because I met Merv in I think it was either the late 80s or early 90s when he was the legal counsel for something called the Council of Energy Resource Tribes. And there'll be a few people here who remember that organization. So Merv's going to talk about policy. Then I've got Sierra Green, one of our young Indigenous environmental scientists, Northwest Indian College. Sierra's enrolled, Nez Perce tribal member. Looking forward to her comments about community and the importance of partnerships as we move this work forward. Next, Philip Chavez. Philip's a Marine veteran. We've got 3 veterans at least on the call today, I think, Merv, myself, and Phil. Marine veteran, Colorado State University graduate, and his focus is on human dimensions of natural resources and works in the area of solar energy. So we're going to be really looking forward to what Phillip has to say. And then Lydia Jennings, who's joining us. Lydia is a doctoral candidate, University of Arizona, Native Nations Institute, Department of Environmental Science, and she's going to talk a little bit about policy issues that she thinks are pretty important as we move this work forward. And then last but not least will be myself. Most of you know I've been really focused on environmental issues in, as we euphemistically say, Indian country or in among our native nations for the last 30 years. And I'm really excited to hopefully um, corral everyone as we move through this discussion and maybe have a little discussion amongst ourselves here at the end of this program. So um, that's what we're going to do. And with no further ado, it's a great pleasure. We want to start with really Faith Spotted Eagle to address what's always the most important, I think, in all of our work in Indigenous communities, and that's that cultural grounding that we bring to everything we do. So Faith, I'm going to turn this program over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, greetings. Once again, Creator, you've given us a beautiful red day, and I extend a virtual handshake and empathy to you. Work in relationship with our mother, Inamaka. So, real fast, I just want to quote something that I remember that came out of your book with Uncle Vine, Dan, when you talked about the tie between biological and cultural diversity. It's one and the same, because the cultural diversity that we talk about is patterned after things in nature that teach us time and time again. There's thousands of lessons in nature, but of course we can't learn those lessons if we're stuck in housing areas because we have no car, we have no resources, we don't have the academic background to do anything. So that leads us back to grassroots. And so my voice is from out here in the wonderful wilderness of grassroots on the front line. And so you don't have to be a leader to be an elected tribal official. And that's what I tell my young people over and over again. It's good that we have them because it's a necessary thing. But before we had elected tribal leadership that was built on a colonial basis, we had our grassroots people that were heads of households, heads of Kioshpayas. And so that governance system still is at work. But the difference is that we have gotten dysfunctional, carried away only for our family. And so now what we're trying to do is, one of the things that colonialism taught us is to isolate from each other. So one of the kids told me when they went to college, they said something profound. And the profoundness was, you know what? When I went to college, it was the first time that I had a friend outside of my family. I mean, you can see that as a good thing, but you also see it as a limiting factor that they were not allowed, or it was frowned upon to invest anything too much outside of your family. So we're relearning that on revisiting how to be a good relative. And so taking us to the good relative to the earth, the biggest thing the last 12 years, first of all, I was going into protecting the water. My home was taken along the Missouri River by the Fort Randall Dam. Michael Lawson has written about it in Damned Indians and talked about all the awful legal genocide that was committed. And so this morning we have the privilege of talking with somebody from the heroes of the Muskogee Nation. You are our heroes with this court case that came through, and all of a sudden, everywhere I'm hearing about Muskogees that I didn't pay attention to, and I'm all ears and eyes right now, and respect. But so on the grassroots level, I've fought for water since I was 12 years old. When my dad, along the Missouri River, I was sitting there, he said, "My girl, you're going to have to do something about this." And I told him, I said, "I'm only 12. What am I going to do?" And he said, "You'll figure it out." So over the years, I realized at 71, it's taken me 71 years to touch base on many, many fields that go back to culture and biological diversity. It's the two key things that tie us together. I'm on the, when I was invited to a meeting of the Oceti-Sakowin Power Authority, which is a developer of our own people, it got away with the middleman when you develop a wind farm or an energy project. Rather than having a white corporation came in, we became the corporation, and we've been in existence for a while now. And when I was invited, I said, well, where are the elders? Because you are working with the powers, the great powers of the world, the Chavez, the wind. You need cultural understanding if you're going to be messing with the power of the wind. So they took my direction, which actually came from ACES. ACES has a council of elders, so I suggested they have a council of elders so they could connect with the powers of the world through a cultural frame and lens. So I am on the council of elders for both ACES and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society and the OSPA, Oceti-Sakowin Power Authority. From there, 12 years of trying to stop KXL, and we're still holding them off after 12 years, despite all the naysayers. We're still in that battle. I learned a lot from KXL battle when I went to Standing Rock. I noticed that at Standing Rock, and no fault of our own, it's because of our captivity by genocide, is that a lot of times we don't know everything that is in our surrounding because of the captivity. So I made a vow based on elders that said this for 40 years, that you need to know everything along the Missouri River, which is our lifeline. So we developed a cultural bioregion focus, and in 10 years, we hope to co-manage the Missouri River on a 150-mile stretch. So those are two of the endeavors that we're doing through Braveheart Society, which is a traditional society that existed a long time ago, and we can do just as much on the grassroots if we are border crossers and we work with the elected officials. And I think I've eaten up my 8 minutes. So,
well, I think you've done an incredible job of framing this for us, Faith. Thank you so much. And I hope you can stay on and join us here after we get through kind of a round through the panel speakers. It's my honor now to introduce Mervyn Tano. As I said, Merv's got a great, really history.
Got a great shirt.
On energy issues. And Merv, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, sir.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Yeah, and it's true. We've known each other for at least 200 years. You showed up on my Facebook feed as a memory, you and Billy Frank, by the way. So look for yourself on there. Okay, I sent you all the first cut, well, the second cut of something entitled Rising Voices as a Tribal Boundary Organization. For those who know me, I've always thought of Rising Voices as being that kind of tribal boundary organization, something that is absolutely needed, not just by tribes, by indigenous peoples, but universities need something like this. Government agencies need something like this. International NGOs and other NGOs need something like Rising Voices as a boundary organization. So I sent that out to you. I've since revised it. So what I want to do is just very quickly go through some of the more important points. Boundary organization, in a sense, the term organization is misleading because it's not really, we're not talking about setting up a think tank with a board of directors and advisors, etc. It is really a way of kind of organizing ourselves so that we can deal with that interface between science and policy, and more importantly, as Faith was talking about, science, faith, policy, and culture. So when I say boundary organization, Rising Voices, I'm not talking about you know, another organization. All right, policy. I thought it'd be more important to kind of deal with policy generically initially. What is policy? From my perspective, very much like the military, policy is the commander's intent. it's a statement of intent. So what is it that we do when we do energy? One, we want it to be just. Two, and really, perhaps even before being just, it has to focus on nation building. I got into a big argument in Hawaii a couple of years ago where people were talking about community-based regulation and all of that. I said, look, man, look, you can talk about that when you're talking about haoles or you're talking about white people, you can talk about community-based. For us, this is an existential issue, okay? Who has control, who decides what we're going to study, how we're going to study, is an existential issue for us. It's not just about producing knowledge, okay? So it has to be about nation building. Another intention or intent is that it be couched in terms of free, prior, informed consent. And if we say that, that opens up a whole can of opportunities. And we can talk about that for hours on end later. I like the idea of what we do being, and I'll revert to this kind of Italian vernacular, to be irredentist, to reclaim our spaces, our places. I've worked, as Dan said, with the Council of Energy Resource Tribes, and we talk about Indian energy, we talk about tribal energy, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about reservation-based energy. So why should we, when we're talking about the tribe that had all of these interests, all of these kinds of connections, now be limited to these 40 acres? You know, screw you. This was ours, we can reclaim it. And as we develop policies, as we develop programs, we ought to look in this kind of expansive way of reclaiming our spaces. The last thing I would say as part of our intent is that we support the notion of the circular economy. I started a Facebook group about 10 years ago, and I had to explain to folks what a circular economy is. And I think I had about 20 people in the group. Now I get about 20 people each week that want to join. There's over 2,000 people that are now throughout the world that have focused in on this notion of the circular economy, that this idea of recycling is fine, but we got to go early on and figure out what it is that we want to have so that as we develop energy resources, as we use those energy resources, we're doing it in a way that is not going to generate additional waste that, excuse me, that we're going to be able to, in a sense, reuse, recycle, and minimize waste. Okay, the last point I wanted to make is, again, the notion of the centrality of nation building. I work for the Council of Energy Resource Tribes. It was a tribal organization. My bosses were the tribes. These are governmental entities. But there's a big difference between the governmental entity that we see in operation with the constitutions, et cetera. Because you can look at what's happening to this nation that we call the United States right now and see what happens when you don't have the kind of leadership that can unify people around an important issue, an important concept. One of the things that really is kind of depressing in a sense is that we're not talking about huge sacrifices We're talking about putting on a mask, and we can't get our heads around that. But that's the kind of thinking that we ought to be really concerned about, is that how do we get behind an idea? Because building a nation is not about having a constitution, it's not about having uh, rules and regulations, a tribal council. It's about people agreeing that this is important for us as a people. And if we can't do energy that way, we are never going to do tribal energy. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Merv. Thank you. Some good food for thought there. We'll come back to some of these issues here. Sierra, we're really looking forward to hear what you want to bring to this conversation about energy systems today.
Yeah, I think that was a great segue into what I wanted to share as well. And I think if we currently look at the status of energy systems in society, we recognize the perspectives of this resource extraction and exploitation. The result of this perspective, though, is material and institutionalized dependencies imposed by the colonial frameworks. But the result of this approach is apparent in our communities who lack access to equitable energy. We experience energy deficits. We're disproportionately experiencing the impacts. But again, these are the results from viewing and engaging with energy from an extractive relationship. And although this might be repetitious for us online, stating this, just what I stated, is part of education. And that's what I want to talk about. So I think it's important to continue to bring that to the forefront, that this is extractive, exploitive, and it's not part of our cultural ways, as Faith was talking about. So our cultural values, these have been what sustained this earth for millennia, and they're founded in the reciprocal relationships, the relationships that are founded in responsibility to the past and the current and the future generations. And it's based with the mutual respect for our human and non-human counterparts. Those are honored. The colonial shift away from these values is apparent, though, in the framework of current energy systems. But that's not the end-all be-all, that we're in this extractive and exploitive state. That's why we're having this discussion. And so I want to take it back to history, since that's where we always like to. My dad always says, how are you going to know where you're going if you don't know where you came from? And on May 4th, 1877, this was during the Nez Perce flight from the U.S. government to Hulazu, who was a Nimipu a Nez Perce chief. He stated, "I belong to the land out of which I came. The earth is my mother." I'm just going to read that again. "I belong to the land out of which I came. The earth is my mother." And that statement is so powerful. If you've seen or visited our homelands or heard our stories that describe our traditional places, you would understand the complexities of relationships, our inherent responsibilities, our reciprocal nature, and that we hold the utmost respect for the sanctity of our homelands and our plant and animal relatives. And so regarding education and energy systems, it's not enough to understand thermodynamics and carbon sequestration, photovoltaic cells, which I know some of you guys are very versed in. But we absolutely must deepen and appreciate our understanding of power and place. So I know Dan and Vandelary Jr. wrote a great book, Power and Place, and it talks about Indian education. But to me, that's, before I read the book, these were ideas that I had, and you guys put it so eloquently. But this idea that, yes, formal institutionalized education is important. Well, more importantly, is understood that what we need is people with inherent relationships with the land, with the lived experiences that span the millennia. And, where do we find that knowledge and how do we promote it? what's the first step in having this idea translate into actionable policy and science? So for me personally, my approach is small scale, community based, because that's the place of my people and our ancestral homelands. And so to put this theory into practice, we have to first and foremost teach within our own community the values that question the extractive and exploitive behaviors. We have to perpetuate these teachings that are interwoven into our traditional stories. We must provide these opportunities for our community to build that relationship with our homelands. So then they will engage with her and recognize her as their mother. Before we can start to change these policies and delve into science, this is where we need to start. So as faculty at Northwest Indian College at the Nez Perce site, and through a summer program a colleague, Maggie Picard, and I developed, it's called Nimi Punawat. And Nimi Punawat means life-ways of the Nez Perce. And so what we do with that program is we emphasize an enhanced collaboration between us community members, the Nez Perce tribe, the local academic institutions, and local agencies, the Forest Service, Idaho Fish and Game. And the foundation of the program is to promote the healing and protection of our sacred environment. And it's not for restoration and conservation. It's a very different idea, right? This healing and protection, that's what we're doing. And to frame that, it's you would never say, oh, I want to restore and conserve my mother. You want to protect and heal your mother, right? It's a whole different perspective. Although a lot of times when you're writing a grant, they don't know what we mean when we say that. And that's exactly the point, is that they won't know what we mean until they are able to experience what it is that we're experiencing. And so we've drawn these partners, and we allow them to give their presentations on their current efforts. But what really shifts the whole dynamic is that we provide them, our partners and our community members, with this experiential learning of going out to our places. And some might say, well, what's this got to do with energy? This is everything that's got to do with energy, right? We are sustaining ourselves through these practices. We are sustaining our culture through these practices. And we are staying connected to our homelands that continues to serve us the energy that we need to perpetuate all these ideas forward. And so I just want to conclude with saying that, it's not just about the values though. Yes, I think that's where we need to start. Each of us are exhibiting components of education in our existence, but are we exhibiting values? Where we focus our energy and how we exchange our energy and how we honor the system of energy in which we exist should drive our conversations within our communities and with our institutional agent and agency partners, so that the systematic change can actually be energized. If we want to talk about energy, that's where I think we really need to start. And it starts with this education. And to call it that is, just put it in a kind of a box of education is one thing, but this experience and life is really what it is.
Thank you, Sierra. I think, boy, I tell you, there's some really incredible themes developing in these first three presentations. So everyone take notes, and we'll have some discussion about this here as a way of wrapping this up. At this point, Philip, I believe it's your turn. So you're on. Philip Chavez.
Okay, thank you. I'm doing a call in because my computer's not working very good. But so my name is Phillip Chavez. I'm from Fort Collins, Colorado. I work with a nonprofit organization called Trees, Water, and People. We do reforestation and also solar energy. So I'm going to be talking mostly about the solar energy part of the organization that we kind of do. We work with different tribal entities we've been to White Earth. We work really close with Pine Ridge Reservation, with Henry Red Cloud's renewable solar energy. We've also been working with a lot of the pueblos, Santo Domingo, and a couple other different pueblos down in Santa Fe. We've done also outreaches with different indigenous youth groups in Minnesota and a couple other places that aren't necessarily on the reservation. But kind of our the thing we do is we have a grant, and we have these portable solar suitcases that we have kind of prefabricated, but not into a box, that we have elementary, middle school, high school, college kids, and community members kind of put together. And through this process, we kind of show, how kind of solar energy works, renewable energy works, and we kind of tie it in to fit wherever we are working with. With the Navajo reservation, we kind of, we try to bring in the elders as much as possible when we're working on the reservations to talk about their traditional stories and kind of bring in that connection with understanding renewable energy, of looking at the sun and looking at the land and looking at some of these other perspectives, of instead of just being like, hey, this is solar energy and this is watts and amps and that type of stuff. We do try to bring as much cultural context into our programs as possible, so that we can bridge that understanding between our cultural ways and our science ways, so that they kind of bridge and brings a different perspective, kind of bringing that idea to youth that, hey, our cultural ways that my grandma's talking, I can bridge these things into science, into education, and bring that to a different perspective instead of the same Western perception in our education. And so we've seen huge, we've seen a great callbacks for us to come into different communities and feedback from a lot of the youth, and kind of stimulating that idea and that understanding of a lot of this stuff, and kind of sparking that just that connection. And I think it's important when we do teach these type of things, renewable energy, that we do bring those cultural contexts, because that makes us who we are. To me, as an Indigenous person, like, this is what our land, and like Sarah was saying, our land is part of us. It is in our blood. It is who we are. And so by bridging that communication through Western standards, we can bridge that idea, understanding that our youth they do have a place within science, and there is a way for us to communicate that. Part of our program too is we've kind of done given suitcases also to different organizations. My wife did work to Puerto Rico, and we gave her a couple suitcases to give to after Hurricane Maria happened, because these solar suitcases that we build are pretty basic, but they're waterproof and they're easy portable. And a lot of times what they do is they have a 12-volt battery that recharges through a solar panel, and they're put together, and they're portable, they can recharge your cell phone. You can power a light bulb for up to 24 hours with some of the LEDs that we have. And so when my wife was doing work in Puerto Rico, she was able to bring some of that stuff down there to share with the community because of the lack of infrastructure, power infrastructure. And it was incredible to see, because when she brought that down, the community loved it, but not only loved it, but there was another gentleman part of the community who was an engineer. And so he was able to take and understand this, the small piece that we brought in, and looked at it and said, hey, we can do something with this. And so what he did was he created a solar pump, a solar powered pump to pump water for their whole community within this rural area. So allowing access for water, because, in Puerto Rico, when the infrastructure goes down, a lot of times it goes down for weeks. And so by introducing the solar idea, they were able to have access to clean water, to not only for the people, but also irrigation for their farming. And so this is kind of the thing that we've seen happen through our organization, is just, the idea is growing within our youth, kind of stimulating that understanding in our youth, but also within other rural communities, because the lack of access, with different communities we see through Indian country, you look at the Navajo reservation, some of these other reservations that don't have the infrastructure to bring that type of energy. And so that's kind of our basis to kind of stimulate that. We're not on a huge scale to kind of do some of the stuff on big scales, but just to stimulate the youth programs and the idea, and to these different communities. We also partner with a little bit, or got to go and visit with White Earth, Honor the Earth, Winona LaDuke. We got to go visit her place where they were doing solar heating. And so looking even too with solar heating in some of our different communities, allowing for them to build and create those things for not just for the communities, but also the money is within those communities. So we're funding, organizations like that and Henry Red Clouds, to where we're hiring indigenous people to do work for indigenous communities. And so that's kind of bringing that around too as well. So, but thank you. So.
Well, thank you, Philip. That's a really great example to hear the story of the impact your solar suitcase had on the people in Puerto Rico. That's real. For people who don't have water, to have a water pump, that's pretty inspiring. Thank you. Okay, Lydia Jennings is going to be our next speaker from the University of Arizona Native Nations Institute. Lydia?
Coming to you from Chavez in northern New Mexico. And so it's an honor to be here with you all. I'm from the Pasquayaqui Nation. So I work on mining reclamation and the restoration process, and then my minor is in American Indian Studies and looking at really consultation processes with indigenous peoples. So Phillip just gave a great kind of summary of some of the work that they're doing with solar. And I see a lot of tribal nations really moving and promoting solar energy as a way to shift their industries from coal and dirty energy. The Ute Mountain tribe is a great example of this, of selling their solar energy excess to local co-ops, and it's being a really important generator of revenue. And while I think solar is an important step forward in green energy, I also believe it's important to be mindful that solar energy still requires metal and is still part of the extraction industry. The increase in solar energy is expected to double in the next 20 years. Solar voltaic cells require metals such as copper, zinc, cadmium, and rare earth elements such as gallium, germanium, indium, selenium, and tellurium. And where are those metals going to come from? Some of these metals can be recovered as byproducts from the production of mining other metals. Many of these metals are impacting indigenous lands domestically, like the Tohono O'odham Nation, the San Carlos Apache, and the Navajo, and that's just in Arizona. And many indigenous people worldwide, such as the Maya in Mexico and Belize, the Quechuan in Peru, and the Mura in Brazil, just to name a few. We need to recognize, and I think in many cases we do, how indigenous economies are dependent on the natural resource trap, which stunts our communities in cycles of boom and bust based on the price of the commodity and the impacts that it has on the environmental and public health of the nations in which they operate. The Navajo Nation and the Crow Nation are both heavily invested in coal mining and are an example of that, and now are feeling the repercussions as coal energy is being replaced by solar energy. So my work in land restoration, but a lot of the foundation that piqued my interest in this work is growing up near boom and bust communities, of seeing lands where there's still coal contamination and water running from the faucets in the waters, or running and seeing abandoned mines on my daily runs. And I've chosen to look at the restoration process, the role that microbes have in recovering and stabilizing these wastes, as well as working with industry to understand their concerns and challenges, and also develop scientific methods to improve those practices. And what I've learned really is, like, we as indigenous people have to be at the table. I've been in conversations in places where I'm the only indigenous person there, in a room full of old white guys. And really just even mentioning tribal nations, and you see them get really uncomfortable with it because it's not something considerations they've had to typically have. And so I think it's important that we as indigenous people are at the table in all capacities. As Dr. Green mentioned, cultural knowledge holders are imperative to informing us what plants are sacred or have medicinal purposes, and we need them to inform us scientists, and I prefer indigenous scientists in this process, on how we protect and value the ecosystems that many of our communities have been disconnected from. So a few suggestions I see moving forward in the two facets of my work is really tribal nations and indigenous peoples need to be involved at all stages if they choose to invest in mining or extraction in their communities. And that means they need to be involved before any land is disturbed, and really have a clear idea of how that land that might be disturbed will be used at the end of the lifespan of the mine. Most lifespans range from 20 to 100 years. And I think that kind of goes back to the circular economy idea that Dr. Tano mentioned. Within this, I are being something that's really motivated right now. And I think those are so important to the process. But I also have a question for our communities as we think about that. Do we have the capacity in them to have advisory boards for various projects? If not, then we need to know that, and we need to be thinking about how education is a key to ensuring that we have capacity for that in the future and that our voices are present at all of these tables. Tribal nations, I also believe, need to have consultation guidelines built into the tribal code. So this includes timelines of meeting with the industry. This includes definition of what consultation means, what restoration means, what plans can be used or not used, and also what advisement and approval means to a nation. When they aren't clearly defined, I've seen examples of communities going and praying to protect a mountain, and that being interpreted by mining industry executives who maybe don't have a lot of relationships or background with Indigenous people, interpreting that as a prayer for good production of their extraction process. Dr. Sienna Howard at the University of Arizona has done some really excellent scholarship working with the Maya beliefs to develop such consultation guidelines and timelines that might work as an important example to other nations. And Dr. Claudia Nelson at UC Boulder has a database of consultation policies for Indigenous people that is also useful for our nations to build upon. I also want to think about what are the different ways we can hold multinational corporations accountable in extraction. One method is activism, and has been very effective in the last couple years, but I also think looking at and using international policy and framework is another method. UNDRIP is good to highlight, but it's not enforceable. One that I have seen a little bit more effective is organizations like the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Companies that are members of OECD are supposed to comply with international standards. Another example that's been particularly effective in Africa is the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. So those are two places that we can begin to learn about local framework of protecting local communities, miners, and how to really be more enforceable in some of these policies. So that's kind of the main points that I wanted to get across today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. That was very concise, and I think you raised some fascinating points. By way of opening this up, I'd like to kind of suggest, already there are a couple of very obvious themes that have come out of, the presentations we've heard so far. And I think the first theme goes directly to this fact that as we think of nation building, one of the challenges that we have is that we not fall erroneously into a kind of protectionist or enclosed or kind of notion of who we are as nations. And I think Faith brought this up in terms of, building these relationships and these truly international relationships. So the first thing I'd like to throw out, and I've got two other quick points I'll make, and then I'd like to open it up. But as we think about these relationships, I'd like to hear what people's thoughts are on first. Why aren't we doing more among ourselves as nations, creating international agreements between the Crow and the Dene and the Lakota and the Muskogee and the Oneida of New York? We're nations. We need to be making treaties. We need to be making into agreements. And we need a whole rebirth of traditional tribal diplomacy. We had those traditions. I know just a little about the Pacific Islanders, but they had an incredible seafaring diplomacy that they literally navigated across the oceans. We should be doing this, and energy is a great opportunity for us to explore that. So that's kind of one thing. Let me throw out two more quick ones. Don't let that leave you. The other one is, let's really focus on how we can take this notion, and almost everyone's touched onto it. I think the greatest contribution Indigenous thinkers can make today is letting people know that when we talk about economic revitalization, economic growth, environmental or landscape restoration, that can never be separated from an ecocultural restoration, a reconnection of people and place. And that's, I think, what a lot of, minerals and mining engineers don't get. They think of this as resource extraction, what Sierra so correctly called resource extraction and exploitation. Merv, you've been around that for years. And I think what we bring to it's different. It's like, no, we're talking about an ecocultural restoration. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Last but not least, I think here's the good news. The good news is the bad news. Bad news first. We've got so many challenges right now that the good news is there's plenty of work for everyone. If we can just focus, our hearts and our minds and our communities and truly do that 7th generation thinking, I think our brother Bob Goff, the late Bob Goff, used to like to talk about, that old blues song, you've been down so long, it looks like up to me. Well, in some ways, our native nations have been so behind in certain areas of infrastructure development. We don't want to build like the dominant system. Let's leapfrog it. Let's really go that next stage and be models of how humankind can behave as our elder, our wisdom keeper, Faith implored us to. Let's start conducting ourselves as mature, responsible, good relatives to the rest of life on this planet. And it's not going to be easy. It's hard work, but there's work for everyone. I don't care what you're doing. It can tie into these 3 things. So Merv, I saw you were chomping at the bit to get in on this. So.
Yeah, this has been really fascinating because, everybody who has spoken, I said, oh yeah, but I got a question for Lydia first. Have you worked with ICMM?
No, I have not.
Okay. I worked with them off and on for a couple years back, and I tried to get some folks engaged from the tribes. And one of the problems is, and this in a sense responds to your question, Dan. It's kind of expensive to play in those venues. Because if you want to be, for example, you want to get tribes engaged in the development of ICMM's indigenous policies, the International Council of Mining and Minerals or something like that, okay? Now, these are the big guys, these are the majors. And that's one of the problems we face as indigenous peoples. The process is not generally that the big guys show up. There's little guys showing up, they're doing some exploration, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is never that these little guys are going to actually develop a mine because they don't have the wherewithal to do it. They take it up to a point, basically raping the land because they don't have the resources to do the kind of restoration or clean as you go type of processes. And then they sell it to the big guys, the Newmonts, et cetera, who come in. And herein lies the difficulty, and you raised it, and Faith raised it as well. They look at it as kind of benefit sharing. I said, wait. What you're talking about is fundamentally changing our life forever. And you're talking about benefit sharing, you know, it's a lot deeper than that. And it's going to take more than just one guy from Hawaii sitting in a table at the in Montreal someplace and saying, "Oh no, here's what you got to consider," and that's why I think the idea of rising voices is as this boundary organization is so important, because it brings together people who can talk about these kinds of issues at several different levels, because one of the most valuable thing that can come out of some of these mines and these energy development is the extremophiles in the tailings ponds, etc. That's not ours. It should be ours, but we don't view it as ours. And these guys have got it in their laboratories, and they're figuring out how they're going to use these extremophiles in material science, in cleanup, et cetera, et cetera. And we don't have the kind of wherewithal to say, hey, kapu, this is ours, and we're going to make something out of it. So, and that's why you need to have a beating a dead horse. No, not necessarily a beating a horse, but this is why rising voices as a kind of organizing way of looking at things is so important.
Yeah.
I think that we all have our different talents in looking at approaching a problem from multidisciplinary. And that's why when I speak with youth, I always say, like, no matter what your interests are, you're going to be important into addressing these issues. And I often make it around mining, because whether you're an artist and you're bringing your art to bring attention or make educational material, or you're a lawyer and you're looking at it from the legal perspective, or you're a scientist, or you're just a public speaker and can bring attention and educate about Indigenous perspectives, like those are all important facets. And one of the other things to kind of address is I have been really moving in my scholarship to stop talking about sacred sites, but instead to move towards talking about sacred ecosystems, because a site can be built around or built under, but an ecosystem is all encompassing, and it's all in part of it. And really, when you do a mining process, you're impacting the entire ecosystem. And so really making sure that we change that type of jargon in our legal writings and our scientific writings to encompass the entire ecosystem that is being impacted by any type of extraction process. And the last thing I'll just say in that is that one voice is not effective at these tables. We need to have multiple, right? Because they're not going to, like you said, Dr. Tano, is that one voice, they can ignore that. But when they have multiple voices in multiple layers of policy and of science, then they have to listen. And so that's why constantly telling youth that we need them in this process, in this fight, and building up that capacity for them to make the difference is critical.
Yes, absolutely. Faith, I see you're off mute. Do you have something to comment on?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what the young lady said about when you look at sacred sites, there's something deeper at work there. Just recently, as you know, we've had an amazing week with court decisions and things that have gone in our favor of all things during the Trump administration. But Judge Brian Morrison up in Montana ruled against the KXL pipeline about a month and a half ago, and he cited the Endangered Species Act, which is really crucial to us, because I kept telling our tribe and other people, there's something here that we have to look at. The animal nation, the two-legged, the four-legged, they're talking to us, and we need to figure out, they're leading us, they're talking about us. So one of the things that has come up is the dung beetle. The dung beetle is at risk. And so what I'm having a bunch of cultural resource people and cultural people do is look at the ecosystem tie with the dung beetle, and the dung beetle feeds the burying owl. So the young lady was talking about the massive amount of ecosystems that are involved in one incident. So this is huge. It opens a door for an ecosystem that could be destroyed by the KXL pipeline. And if you look at the dung beetle, the maggots, they are in our beadwork. If you look at some of and there's a reason why they're in our beadwork with the maggots, they're good house cleaners. They're good earth cleaners. If something like you put the buffalo skull out there, they're going to clean it up real good. And so we have to look at what is beneath that in this co-management. And I don't like to say co-management, but it's a door that we're trying to get into on the Missouri River, that we have to know everything that is on that system, whether it's plants, animals, fish. We're doing surveys. In fact, next week we'll be going out with an ethnobotanist. We've done 50 miles. We're going to put another 50 in, but we're making relationship with the earth that we've forgotten about. We just literally have been held captive in making relationship with that. And so we hope to develop a template that you've been talking about in this discussion. And one of them, we're working with Wes Martell, and some of you know him as a water warrior from Wind River. And he said there are only absolutely maybe 12 water codes in the US with tribes. So what we're hoping to do is develop a template of similar water codes all up and down the Missouri River. And why can't we be doing intakes that we could share water? Surplus water is Indian water. We could be sharing that all the way at the top of the headwaters to Wind River, all the way down the river. So in order to do that, we have to come out of the trauma camp that we've been held captive in and begin to think about those relationships that we had. In 2004, Yankton initiated, our treaty committee initiated the International Treaty to Protect the Sacred against KXL and tar sands. And we had 10 First Nations, we had several, we had the Pawnees, we had many tribes come together and sign this as a revival. We could do our own treaties. We could do our own unilateral agreements. And so I appreciate you, Dan, bringing that up, because we have gone in that direction. And so we're hoping on the Missouri River, we have a 10-year plan. At the end of that 10 years, we'll be managing our section of the Missouri River from Indigenous science. So I'll put that much there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Faith. That's a really incredible undertaking you're involved in, and I think that's really the the other issue that I think is worth exploring, because you've all touched on it in some way, and that is the opportunity we have to take some of these very practical problems in our communities, whether it's water, whether it's clean air, whether it's pesticide or herbicide flow into a water system, energy. The energy issue itself is taking these practical problems and making these the sites where we do our education. I don't know why we don't have a whole curriculum beginning, about 4th or 5th grade on energy, but it's not going to be done in a classroom. It's taking these young boys and girls out into the community, showing them the challenges, the issues, and starting to teach them about how to think about, with all these greater cultural and social concerns, how to address these in responsible ways. Merv, you touched on it, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. I think one of our strengths, as we think particularly about energy, is when it gets right down to it in our most ancient traditions, at least among the Zoyaha, the Yuchi people, we have probably more discussions about responsibilities than we do rights. Responsibilities that we have to these relatives we share this planet with. And I think that's something that we could frame a whole lot of community education around, letting, teaching chemistry, teaching biology, teaching geography, geology, environmental science around these relational kinds of notions of our existence. I'd like to get people's thoughts on that.
I'll do it very quickly. I had a let's say a disappointing experience with the National Institutes of Health, because I was working up at Nez Perce. I was working up at Umatilla, and everybody was saying the same thing. It says what we've been saying. we're part of the land is part of us. All right. And obviously, if you're concerned about the health of the people, the health of the ecosystem, and the relationship between the ecosystem and the people, you want to study that. And so one of the things we did was put together a grant application to look at how what we ate, not only what we ate, what we drank, but how we produced the food impacted us and our generations, because it wasn't just about genetic research. It was about because we're not just controlled by our genes. It's what we. At that point, I did not have the necessary expertise in the jargon to explain exactly what that was, and so. One of the reviewers said, you know, this is basically nature versus nurture, and you know, gave it a thumbs down. And yet you look at what people are looking at now. That's what they're looking at. They're looking at what's in your gut and how that's affecting not just you, but your kids, etc. And there was that insight that needed somebody a hell of a lot smarter than me to present. And that's what I think we have an opportunity to do here, is to say, look, they're saying that, and it's easy to say, yeah, Auntie, I know. No, but Auntie's a lot smarter than you think, guy. You know, and you gotta humble yourself and say, understand that perhaps if you look at the kind of research that's being reported, that there's a connection between what your auntie's saying and the kind of research that's being done. And there is a connection with the deer and future generations. So, yeah, this is it's about framing it and bringing people together. So, you know, the point of educating people is not just about educating us. It's about educating the other guys as to exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Sierra, any thoughts? Any kind of last thoughts as we kind of move towards wrapping this up today?
Yeah, I really I had a discussion yesterday with somebody about similar ideas, and he said, you know, he was really talking about the seventh generation and going on and on about, you know, we're this seventh generation. I said, you know, that's good to recognize and all, but we can't just stop thinking here. We have to think, you know, that far out as well. We're going to be ancestors someday, and I do not want my my ancestral resume to read that I was part of all this mess that's going on, right? I want it to read that I was keeping this woven tie to our past and into the future. And when we were talking about infrastructure and those the lack of infrastructure in our communities, something that I've really been pushing, and there's been a couple youth interested in and out, and you know, with my background in education, we find that middle schools where you got to catch them. If you don't catch them there, you know, it's kind of getting a little late to really spark interest. But in letting them recognize and understand that, you know, you guys have ideas and knowledge that have not even come to the forefront. I mean, I don't think I'm very tech savvy when I look at my younger siblings. You know, they're on it, but they have, if they can, and it's our job to do this, connect them to our ancestral knowledge, and they're going to be the ones to weave that together to, like you said, leapfrog into this next generation of solutions. And I really do believe that, and I think that's something that each of us can instill in our own children, instill in our nieces and nephews. And we have a series that I call Genius of Our Ancestors. And, you know, kids nowadays think you can pick up the phone and Google how to do this and what about that. And I'm guilty of that too. But at the same time, I recognize that our ancestral knowledge and so much of it that's embedded in our language absolutely has to be part of what is carried forward. And you know, each of us have a duty in doing that. And you know, I'm no language expert, but I feel like I'm doing my part. And my given name is Sepulchre Sweetus, which means thing that causes survival. And when I was told what it meant, I thought, that's, yeah, talk about responsibility. That's not a right to have that name. That's a responsibility to really carry that forward. And I take that seriously, you know, in the work that I do and the integrity that I try to uphold for myself. And I just think that's where we need to keep pushing forward and pushing each other to uphold those values.
Very good, very good. Philip, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you know, it's bring up a lot of good points, and I feel like, you know, working with youth, I kind of see this cultural context of responsibility, you know, of purpose, and you know what I mean. That's when I think, you know, kind of tying in our traditional ways of looking at purpose, you know, needs to be revitalized in a lot of ways, because I feel like, you know, working with youth kids, they feel lost. I feel like in a lot of ways, not feel connected. And so we see those kids that, you know, go to the extreme of, because they don't feel like, what's my purpose in life? I don't have a purpose. And I feel like in our traditional ways, there's a way where we understood our purpose. We knew our responsibility to our environment and to our relatives, you know, to the four-leggeds, to the wingeds, to all those. We had a responsibility, like I said, to protect them. And I think there's something to be said about how do we reestablish that connection for our youth to find a purpose. You know, will it decrease? And I'm hoping, you know, with that purpose comes the decrease of the suicides and the different, you know, issues we see with our youth. Because once we have a purpose, I feel like for me, you know, growing up, it was kind of like always searching for something. How do I connect? What's my purpose in life? What am I good at? You know, so this search throughout life, but understanding our traditional stories and a lot of the teachings that I've learned from a lot of elders of just how that purpose was never, in our traditional ways, we knew what our purpose was. We knew what we had a responsibility to. And so we never fought with that understanding. And so I feel like there's, you know, that connection with our traditional ways of combining that to not only our youth, but also our investment in our resources of how can we rekindle all those purposes to strengthen our communities and our youth, to stimulate that mind, that thought process of like, okay, my responsibility is to this. Well, what direction do I need to go to become more accountable to that? And so I just want to make a comment of that and looking at our connectedness and just our traditional ways we have. There's a responsibility, I feel like, once we understand these, of reconnecting that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Lydia, any final thoughts as we get ready to wrap this up?
So last Rising Voices, I think back to a lot of the breakout session that I was in, and it was led by Dr. Kyle White. And he talked a lot about how do we think of energy. We talked about all of the different issues. And then he said, but how does your language talk about energy? And we had this group of people, but we don't have necessarily a translation for extraction or for mining or power grids, but we have wind, water, air, land. And so I think going back to those foundations as solutions, as long-term solutions, going back to those original teachings and using the skill sets we have of modern technology, but simplifying it is something I am constantly looking towards in terms of energy solutions. So just as Sierra highlighted the importance of language, it's a process I'm going through in learning my own language because I didn't grow up speaking it, and looking for those energy solutions, but also in looking at how that informs my science. As someone who works in restoration ecology, I asked a tribal linguist, what does it mean in our language for like a scientist? What's a translation? And so, you know, he asked me, well, what exactly do you do? And so I was telling him I work with plants and microbes. And he was like, well, the translation for that is earth healer. And I can't think of a better translation for the work that I do and the meaning that it has to me than that. And so again, the expertise and the expertise of our own systems and of our knowledge, and really valuing the knowledge holders in our community is essential to the work that we do moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone. We could go on, and we are going to have, our program, our open work group discussion on energy on the 24th of July, and this will be posted for people that are hopefully going to participate in that program, to watch, to kind of get their juices flowing and their energy going, their own energy, to think deeply about these issues of energy. I think it's true. You guys have all touched on it. I don't know if Faye's still with us, but I know among her Lakota relatives, I just think, Neihart's rendition of Black Elk's teachings and that famous couple of paragraphs he has about, everything moves in a circle. Merv talked about it. Lydia, you talked about it. Sierra talked about it. Phil, everyone talked about it. This idea of the regenerative economy, circular economy, I think for energy, that's really the key. Everything the energy that we are going to try to facilitate or co-create, I think at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that we haven't taken life away or destroyed something, but that in fact we are rebuilding something as we're doing it. It can't be this extractive, exploitive, destructive process. And I want to thank you all for really, that's what my takeaway, one of the takeaways I have is I think we've all talked about it. There's a lot of work for everyone to do. And I want to thank all of our panelists, Faith, Merv, Sierra, Phillip, Lydia. I'm really looking forward to the 24th now, because I think we're going to have some pretty incredible breakout sessions. So we'll all be together there again, and looking forward to it. Julie, what time is that program on the 24th? I'm thinking it is
12 p.m. Mountain Time.
12
So
p.m.
8 a.m. for Hawaii folks, 11 a.m. on the Pacific Coast, 10 a.m. Alaska.
Okay.
1 Central.
Excellent.
Lydia, about 200 years ago, put together something called a tribal leaders decision-making guide to environmental remediation technologies. Can I send that to you? Okay.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of naive, but it gives you an idea of what we were trying to do.
Yeah, anything is helpful. I'm in the dissertation writing process right now, trying to finish up by the end of next month. So send me that data. So it sounds really helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Well, that's the good thing about getting together, as our brother Kalani says, a lot of minds are always better than one mind. And that's what we have here. Let's bring good minds together. I think a few wise people have said that. That seems
I don't know.
Something that's in the ether,
I don't know.
Anyway.
You got the gray beard. Oh no, you and I have the gray beards.
Yeah, right. I'm afraid you're right. Okay, everyone. Thank you, and we hope to see everyone on the 24th.
Okay.
Thanks
much.
Okay.
Good rest of your day. And Dan, thank you hugely for moderating and leading the group. And I know that there's a lot of demands right now on everyone's personal and emotional energy and stuff. And so sharing some of that together here today was really beautiful and appreciated. And and Mariah, Chris, I know they'll be putting together the video, and just in a few days we'll send the link out to us, and we'll get that shared with you all and get it posted, and get the information shared for the 24th as well. So deep appreciation for
Yes, thank you, Mariah. Thank you, Chris, our techies, Julie, everyone.
Julie.
Thank you so much.
All right, love you all. Please stay safe, and I will be in touch soon.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
5 o'clock alarm bell rings, same thing every day. They'll answer the phone, I'm not home, I'm already on my way. Out the door, down the street, got to keep me on my feet. I got coffee, I got donuts, in the office down the street. And the fat hat lady's faking a heart attack. And my manager yelling at me, say, can't give her money back. Bank called, the notice overdue. And that's just one more thing I gotta do till I get off the earth. Till I get off the earth. 12 o'clock, the lunch bell rings. Same thing every day. You better answer the phone in the proper tone. Yes, sir, whatever you say. Right on time, on the time. Got to keep me on my feet. I got contracts, I got lawyers in the office down the street. Jam is backing up, holding out against stand. Things ain't working out the way I had them planned. And call the meeting, just a drink or two. That's just one more thing I gotta do till I get off the earth. Till I get off the earth. I get off the earth. I get off the earth. 6 o'clock, it's the happy hour. Sipping on no whiskey sour. Bartender asking about a refill, and I'm wondering who's paying the bill. The ladies be heeding the call. Sugar papers, one and all. My boss be dancing on the dance floor, so I'm heading out that door. And I'm making my move, I'm breaking out this bar. And I'm getting my groove on. I'm driving home in my car, and the blue light comes flashing into view. And it's just one more thing I gotta do. I get off the earth. 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 Oh.